So, okay. So like I said, this is part of a series that I was doing about Egypt, and started from Jacob to entering the Promised Land. So this is one of the series that I did. I know you guys are in between classes right now, so it's going to be a one-off. But what I'm looking at is we're looking at Egypt and how Egyptian archaeology relates to the biblical narrative. So there's certain, we call them anchors. They're anchor points in the Bible where we can use that scripture to pinpoint a time frame. And 1 Kings 6:1 is one of those anchors. It says, "Now it came about in the 480th year after the sons of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, that is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord." So this gives us a very accurate time frame. It was 480 years from when they exited Egypt to when they built the first temple. And we can use that as an anchor point because they didn't measure time the same way we do. We use the Gregorian calendar. So we measure 365 days a year, each year, and then 2000. We're in 2025. So they didn't measure time that way. They measured time based on significant events, like in the 2nd year of Belshazzar, or in the 1st year of Darius the Great, or they used significant events. So when you're trying to fit our time frame, the way we measure time with archaeological time of how they measured stuff, you kind of have to it's like putting Legos together without instruction manual. You kind of have to build as you go. So, so when we're attempting to date Exodus with what Egyptian archaeology has, it proves difficult. The main problem is there's very little documentation. We're talking 4,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago. And we live in in a society of information where it's like, if you want to know what you had for breakfast last week, you can find that, right? You can practically look it up. We have all this information. We're used to information. Back then, they didn't do that. And the documentation that they did write down was very biased. So you got to understand that if you're a pharaoh, a lot of times they want to be seen as a god. They want to have the authority of a god. Because if they had that authority, people listen to them. So the documentation that we do have is biased towards that. So the Egyptians never wrote down their failures, and they would actually try to erase people from history that they didn't like, which is something we'll talk about in a few minutes. So trying to get them to fit together is difficult. However, based on what the Bible tells us and what we do know from Egyptian archaeology, the Exodus probably occurred sometime around the 18th dynasty of Egypt. So the prime suspects for who the Pharaoh was during the Exodus, we get about a 70-year span that we kind of focus on. You have Thutmose II, that's him on the right. His wife Hatshepsut, she became Pharaoh, and then Thutmose's son, Thutmose III, is on the left, and then his son, Amenhotep II, who followed after him. So we can the fact that we can narrow it down to about a 7-year period is pretty good, considering. So this is Thutmose III. He's considered one of the best pharaohs in Egyptian history. This is pretty cool. I'll pass it around if you guys want to check it out.
Yeah.
Now, why are these our prime suspects? Why are these guys considered the potentials for being the Pharaoh of Exodus is a completely different lesson. I don't have time to get into that. But what I'm going to be looking at today is the Egyptian archaeology that correlates with the Bible from the Exodus to when they enter the Promised Land. So, yeah, you can can hold on to that.
You've got a belly button.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm pointing out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It is.
I got some more stuff to show you later, but so one of the main sources of information is called the Temple of Karnak. Now, the capital of Egypt was in southern Egypt, which is also called Upper Egypt because Egypt went downhill. And right outside of their capital, they built this temple. And the temple lasted from about 2000 BC to about 30 AD. And every pharaoh, it was kind of like their presidential library. Every president gets to build his own library. Have you guys have gone to the Ronald Reagan library?
Right.
Like, you don't read anything negative about Ronald Reagan in his library, right? Well, this is what they did. Each pharaoh built their own room, and they wrote all their accomplishments on the walls of these rooms, and it's still standing today. So it's an excellent source of information for us when we're using this for that time frame. But in Thutmose III's room, he wrote 380 names. And the 380 names are people he conquered, nations he conquered, people he conquered. And it gives us a very detailed list of what societies were like back then. The primary list of his first campaign into the Levant, in 1457 BC, the Battle of Megiddo, is actually one of the most extensive lists of foreign places that we have record of. It comprises approximately 119 to 380 toponyms from Canaan, Transjordan, Syria, and Nubia. And there's the Megiddo list, which is 119 names, the Naharina list, which is north of Canaan, Syria, and then the Nubian list, which is south of Egypt. And so these lists are written in hieroglyphics. And the thing is it doesn't give us any detailed information about these people. It's just a list of names is all it is. We don't know if these names were kingdoms. We don't know if these names were groups of individuals. All we know is it's a roster of people that he conquered. That's it. But what's interesting about Jacob L, Joseph L, and Levi L. Those three names are on the list in Karnak. What were they names of towns? Were they names of people? We don't know because it doesn't give us the information. But the fact that their names are on there is very interesting. And Levi L, they come to the conclusion that it was added later on of a list of places he conquered. So right there at the very beginning, we can see the biblical narrative in Egyptian archaeology from the very beginning. So we're going to make a timeline, right? We have the 18th dynasty, the Thutmose era. This is from about 1490 to 1425 BC. And then from there, we're going to look at what Egyptian information there is that coincides with the Bible. The question is the narrative of the Bible accurate? There's a lot of really smart Egyptologists out there. They really, really smart people. And even the smartest of these people cannot agree on a time frame. They have all these different ideas of when these guys existed, when they're kings. And so it's hard to really correlate the information. But we do get a pretty good ballpark picture of what it is. So from there, we're going to go to this guy. This guy is Amenhotep III. He was around 1390 and 1350. Now, what's interesting about this guy is he built his own temple. He built this temple. It's not even in Egypt today. It's so far south, it's actually in the country of Sudan. But the temple is called the Temple of Soleb. And it's dated to around the late 15th century. So that's it right there. Well, that's what's left of it. And in this temple, there was these carvings. On all the pillars, there's these carvings of individuals with hieroglyphics. And each of these carvings was actually a list of his enemies. So on all these columns, you have all the enemies, and the enemies are in the general direction of where they were located at. So if the enemy was a Canaanite, they would be on one of the columns towards the north. If the enemy was a Nubian, they'd be on one of the columns to the south. So what's interesting is there's one inscription. This is it right here. This is a copy of it. What's interesting about this inscription is they use the word shasu. Shasu means nomad. It means it's a people without a country. And the word shashu is used a lot in different areas. So it doesn't mean a person with a country, it means a person with a group of people, basically. It's the word for nomad, is what we use. And what's interesting is this one says the nomads of Yahweh. See, first time in extra biblical history that the name of God shows up outside the Bible. This is about 1400, 1390 BC. It's fascinating, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So this inscription, I'm not going to give you guys a crash course in hieroglyphics, but this line right here at the very top, that basically means the land of, or the mouth of. And if you think about it, think about like how people speak, right? How much, just the way you speak, how much does that say about who you are, right? And in California, we say car keys, right? You go to New Orleans, it's khakis. You go to Boston, it's khakis, right? I mean, that tells you a lot. How you speak says a lot about where you're from. So this could also be interpreted as the mouth of. So it's not necessarily about a land, but about a culture. Now, the thing about hieroglyphics is you can read them from left to right or right to left. The way you figure out which way to read them is the way the little animals are English. In Old English, this is how you wrote it. Because English still had a very German influence. So J's were pronounced as Y's and V's were pronounced as W's. So this is pronounced the same way as this. So the problem is they didn't know how to pronounce this. So what they did was they took the Greek word for Lord, Elahu, and they took the vowels out of it and they put the vowels in its place. That's where Jehovah comes from, because they didn't know how to pronounce it. This is the same thing, just in modern English translation. Now, on that inscription of Soleb, they actually write it this way. Now, how do you pronounce that? Well, what's interesting is the Egyptians may have actually given us more insight into how to pronounce this. Because to pronounce that is either Yahweh or Yahweh, not Yahweh. It's all a question of how do you roll the consonants off your tongue, isn't it? How do you transition from one consonant to another without the vowels? Well, the Egyptians, using that inscription, is pronounced Yahweh or Yahweh, not Yahweh.
Tomato.
I know. For me, I still use Yahweh because for me, it's about who am I talking to? You know, we use the word God. Where does the word God come from? It's German. If you say God's name in Spanish, it's Dios. Dios is a Latin language. Latin language is based off of Greek. Greeks pronounced it Theos. Theos, Dios, God. In Hebrew, God is pronounced El. El. So we're all talking about the same individual, the same God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But that's what's interesting about when you study history is you kind of get more insight about what the Bible is telling us, right? So here's what's interesting about Egyptian culture. Egyptians were polytheistic. So, and they conquered a lot of people. They conquered the Levant. They conquered parts of the Hittites, and they would actually assimilate their gods into their culture. So, like, if they saw the god Baal, right? Baal was a Canaanite god. They actually have discovered temples in Egypt with an image of Baal right next to the image of Ra. They're like, oh, well, we worship the same God. It's the same person. You call him Baal, we call him Ra. So there's actually lots of cults in Egypt of other foreign religions. Those religions include Baal, Teshub, he was a Hittite god, Astarte, Resheph, they're both Canaanite, but they're found in all these pictures in all these Egyptian temples right next to each other. They're like, oh, we're worshiping the same God, it's okay. But you never see Yahweh. You never see the name Yahweh in any Egyptian temples. They never assimilated the God Yahweh, which was probably around in their culture for at least 400 years. Well, why not? Well, look at Exodus 5:2. So Moses comes to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, who is Yahweh, that I listen to his voice to send Israel away? I have not known Yahweh, and I also do not send Israel away. Yahweh, that was the name of God. But the only person who really knew that at the time was Moses, right? So when God is in the burning bush, and he says, what is your name? What do I tell the people your name is? The term he probably used in Hebrew is YHWH. I am who I am, or I am, or to be what I am to be. Basically, it means everything exists because I exist. That's kind of what it means. Or I am the living God. I am the I am. I am it's a living term. It's a present term. So, but the fact that Yahweh never shows up is because no one really knew about it, right? So, Deuteronomy 8:2. And you have remembered all the way which your God Yahweh has caused you to go these 40 years in the wilderness, in order to humble you, to try you, to know that which is in your heart, whether you keep this commandment or not. So, in the temple of Soleh, why would they call them Shasu? If we're talking the early 14th century, I'm doing my numbers right, why would they call them nomads? Because this is probably the time that they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. The timeline fits. Of course, they would call them Shasu. They call them nomads because they didn't have a land. They were just wandering. And amongst that list of names in Soleh, there's also other names. Excuse me. There's one. They call them the Shasu of Ser. It's named after the Mount Ser. Does anybody remember who was at Mount Ser? What group of people were in the Mount Ser region? This is a Jeopardy question. I'll give you bonus points if you can answer this.
Moabites.
Close. Edomites.
Edomites.
The ancestors of Esau were in Mount Ser. The Moabites actually are listed as a Shasu too. Basically, everybody in Canaan was considered a nomad, a Shasu. Not unlike the Hittites or the Nubians who had their own kingdom or anything like that. They recognized them as sovereign nations. They did not recognize these people. So Egyptian history gives us a lot more insight into what was going on, right? During the time of the wandering. Yeah.
Just a quick question. When they were doing their traveling in those desert areas, what were they? Just like in tents? I mean, how
Yes.
how do they shelter themselves in those?
We live in a country, our culture, we bring the food to us. We build fixed houses, and we bring the food to us, right? In nomadic culture, you brought your house to the food. That was the difference. So what they probably did was they just walked around in a big circle for 40 years. And it was seasonal. They would graze off a portion of land. You gotta understand, there was 2 million people in this group. It was not a group that didn't go unnoticed. So they would graze off land, and then they would pack up and move, graze off more land, pack up and move, graze off. By the time they got to here, this one was already regrowing, so they just did a circle. That's the nomad lifestyle. But and you got to understand, in Egypt, everybody lived in cities. In Egypt, Joseph moved everybody into cities because it was easier to feed them. And that's the kind of culture they lived in. And actually, agriculture was not big in Egypt. Their main food supply was the Nile River. The agricultural society was not really relevant in that time frame, but that's something else. So, okay. Next guy. You know how I told you they like to erase people from history that they didn't like? This guy is considered the most hated pharaoh in the history of Egypt. In fact, they didn't even know this guy existed for a while. They thought he existed because of other accounts where they called him the enemy of Egypt or the criminal. But they couldn't find anything that he had actually written. And it wasn't until they started digging that they found out why they hated this guy. His name was Akhenaten. He dates to about 1350 to about 1330 BC. If you don't know this guy, you might know him by his wife, Nefertiti. And if you don't know Nefertiti, you might know his son, King Tut. Akhenaten was his father. I'm sure everybody knows King Tut. Does anybody not know King Tut? No? Okay. Now, what's interesting about Akhenaten is this guy, like I said, Egyptian culture was polytheistic. Their society was based on all these gods. He actually went in and he tried to create a monotheistic society. He tried to start what was called Atonism, or the worship of god Aten. And it didn't go over very well. In fact, he even tried to build his own capital. He tried to move him from Thebes, which was the capital at the time, he was building a new town called Akhenaten, which is basically like if I built a town and called it Brettsville. It's the same thing, So they hated this guy so much that they actually buried his town, the city he was building. And then they built another city over it called Amarna. So it wasn't until they started digging that they actually found this guy. They found what he had done and everything else. Well, what's interesting is they found a ton of tablets. They're called the Amarna tablets. There's 384 of them. And these tablets were written in cuneiform. They were not written in the language of the Egyptians. They were written in the language of the Canaanites and the Hittites. And the 384 of these tablets have been discovered and have been figured out. And 64 of those 384 tablets came from Canaan. Now here's what's interesting about them. Every single one of those tablets is begging him to send his army because of this unknown enemy called the Abaru coming in, conquering their cities. Every single one of them. They're begging him to send the Egyptian army to come save them. Because at the time, Canaan was a vassal state. It's kind of like Puerto Rico. It's part of the United States, but not really. They pay our taxes, but they're not officially part of our country. Canaan was the same way at the time. They paid the taxes, they got their support from Egypt, but they were not technically part of Egypt. And so they were begging him to send his army. Why? Because of these people called the Habaru, or the Abaru, depending on what translation you use. And it's written in cuneiform. It's written in the language of Canaanites. So what were these Abaru? Who were these people that were coming in and conquering them? Well, let's look at them. So they were written in the late Bronze Age, 1400 to 1300 BC. Do you guys know about when in the Bible that would be happening? About roughly?
Babylon?
No.
No.
Babylon's 500.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Give us a hint.
His name starts with a J and ends with Ushua.
Joshua.
Joshua.
Hey.
1400, 1300 BC. This is Joshua. It lines up, time frame lines up exactly with the invasion of Joshua. You've got this, and the word Habru is actually a very old word. It goes back actually to the Uruk and the Sumerian dynasties, and it just means basically means nomad or wanderer or trespasser or invader. That's all it means. So basically, you got all these people writing, begging him for help because these unknown invaders are coming in, conquering Canaan. And they're like, well, who is this? Well, the Bible tells us who it is. Now, here's what's interesting. So when we look at that chronology of 1 Kings, it lines up with Joshua, right? Now, EA 147, 148. EA is Elamarna. That's just how they record the tablets. So when I say EA, it's actually one of the tablets. And of the 384 tablets, they each have a number. So this is tablet 147, 148. They actually depict Canaan as autonomous city-states. They were not a country. They were not joined together. They had several kings, all spread out through the area, and they all had control of their own cities. And which actually correlates exactly with what Joshua says. If you guys want to flip over to Joshua 10, we're not going to read all of these, but I just want to give you a quick idea of what it is. Joshua 10:5. So the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, and the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered together and went up, they with all their armies, encamped by Gibeon and fought against it. See, Canaan had all these cities, and they all were self-dependent. And what you see here is a coalition of 5 kings coming together to fight Joshua, right? Well, that coincides with what the Amarna tablets tells us. Joshua 8:30. So we do know that one of the first places, Joshua enters, they go into Jericho, then they go to the city of Ai, and then they end up in Shechem. But the thing is there's no account in the Bible of a war in Shechem, of how they got conquered or anything like that. In Joshua 8:30 it says, and Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, in Mount Ebal, which is in Shechem. Now, EA 289 tells us Shechem gave their land to the Habru, to these invaders. There was no war, which makes sense as to why the Bible doesn't tell us there was a war. In Joshua 10, the king of Jerusalem was killed in battle near Gibeon, the 5 coalition. In EA 285 and 290, I was waiting for the crash.
Yeah,
I was too. I was waiting for you to run out there and revive somebody.
Yeah, I'm off duty, man. I'm not doing that. So in Amarna tablets 285 through 290, they're written by a guy in Jerusalem who is not a king. He's a soldier. He tells them, I'm just a soldier. I'm like the elected mayor. The king is gone. Where did the king go? Well, Joshua tells us he died in that battle. In Joshua 13:3, the Gideonites of Gath. You guys know who the Gideonites were? Can you tell me a famous guy from Gath? He didn't last very long. Got a stone right in the middle of the forehead.
Goliath.
Goliath. Thank you. Goliath. Yes, Goliath was a Gath. Joshua 13 tells us they did not conquer Gath. That it was left unconquered. It wasn't conquered until later. The EA tablets, it told us that there's a king there named Shuwadada. I'm butchering that name, I know, I apologize. Was the king of Gath, and he was holding off the Habru. In Joshua 10, the king of Lachish, one of the 5 kings, is killed and the city is captured. Tablets 287, 288, 329, and 333 confirms that the king is killed in battle with the Habru, the king of Lachish. Lachish was actually a very major city. Later on, during the Israelite Empire, Solomon, David, and all that, it's basically where they built their machines of war. It was a very important city in Israel. And the king of Assyria would go in and destroy it. But Lachish was a major city at the time.
What's their machine of war?
It was the Iron Age, so all their iron was produced there, their chariots, their weapons. You guys know what the Iron Age was? So this is the Bronze Age. Bronze is made from copper and tin. You put them together, you melt them, you create bronze. Bronze is a good material. It's malleable. You can create weapons out of it and stuff, but it's very soft. So if you got a bronze sword and you hit somebody over the head with it, chances are you bit your sword, right? Bronze. There is theory that the Battle of Troy, you guys seen the movie with Brad Pitt, Troy, just running around with his shirt off?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The reason why the Greeks invaded Troy was because they had a large tin mine. That's one of the theories, is that they wanted their tin to make bronze. The Iron Age was going to happen around the 1200 BC. If you put carbon and iron, you know what you get? Steel. All of a sudden, you got the best weapons. All of a sudden, it's like you got the nuclear bombs. You're the strongest superpower, right? You got the best technology. The problem is you have to heat it up very, very hot to get steel to melt. So it took a long time for them to figure out the technology to heat it up hot enough to make steel. But at the time, bronze was what everybody used. That's why it's called the Bronze Age. All right, that was a little sidetrack.
Thank you.
Joshua 16:10, Gezer became forced labor. In EA 292, it says the citizens of Gezer can be ransomed as slaves for 30 pieces of silver. So the Amarna tablets coincide with what Joshua says, that they conquered Gezer and they turned them into forced labor. Judges 1:27, Israel was unable to take possession of Megiddo. EA 243 tells us the king of Megiddo was able to defend off of Habaru. Judges 1:18, Ashkelon was captured. EA 287 tells us Ashkelon was in the control of the enemy. Joshua 11, Joshua conquers the city of Hazor. It wasn't Hazor that wrote the letter, it was a neighbor, Tyre. It says that their neighbor Hazor was turned over to the Habaru. So everything in the Amarna tablets coincide with what Joshua tells us. Mm-hmm. In fact, it gives us even more information about it too.
Interesting.
So, what the time frame? What was the time frame? Well, in Joshua 14, Caleb says he was 40 years old when Moses sent him in to go spy out Canaan. And in Joshua 14:10, he says that now he's 85 years old. So between when Caleb was 40 and by the time he was 85, that's 45 years from when he spied out Canaan to when Joshua gave Caleb some land, because they had already conquered it. So there is somewhere within 45 years. That's about all we can come to. I've seen some scholars say it took 7 years. I've seen some scholars say more, but no more than 45 years. But what it does is it gives us the timeline. It puts the timeline in what the Amarna tablets is saying it's happening in. Now, oddly enough, Jericho is one of the oldest known civilizations in the world. The city of Jericho has been around longer than 99% of the world. It was a major player back then, but there are no tablets from Jericho. Why not?
Destroyed.
It was destroyed. It was one of the first cities destroyed, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. And it was a powerful city. It had big walls. It should not have been destroyed. How did it get destroyed? You guys remember?
Through the will of God. Oh, the horns.
The horns.
Yeah.
Blow your horns. So when Jericho fell, that's when all the other kings of Canaan were like, whoa, we need to start asking for help. We need to start getting help. That's why they wrote these tablets. It's because they saw Jericho and Ai fall, which to them should not have fallen. Excuse me. Okay, this guy.
Yes, he's the bad guy.
A little information from Steve about that wall that fell down last week. was that the walls didn't fall over like you would think. They actually crumbled from the bottom.
Yeah. Actually, I was reading about it, and they think it was fallen by an earthquake. They can't, because the way it fell is the same thing that you see buildings crumble from earthquakes. So they can't explain why they fell. And it wasn't just part of a wall that collapsed; it was the whole wall that
I'm
collapsed.
not sure that they even knew really, truthfully, what earthquakes were back then.
No, I don't think so. That clock is way off. I gotta fix that.
Batteries going on it.
Okay. Menerpta. This guy was from about 1210 to 1200 BC. He erected a 10-foot tall stele, which is basically a big rock that he writes everything down on. And on that stele, he wrote, Israel is wasted, its seed is not, and Huru, which is the word for Canaan, has become a widow because of Egypt. Now, 1210, 1206. Where do you think we are in the Bible at this point? Guesses? We'd be in Judges. We'd probably be around Deborah and Barak, right? So we know this is an exaggeration. What he claims didn't really happen. But what's interesting is this is the first time you see the name Israel being listed. And what we know from reading Judges about Deborah is the Canaanites had the iron chariots. He had 900 of them, and he was conquering the flats. And all the Israelites were up in the mountains, right? So in Judges 4:1, it says, the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. And the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. The sons of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. So at this point, the Canaanites were running the country. But what's interesting about this is the first time the name Israel pops up in history. What does the name Israel mean? You guys remember, when does the name Israel first pop up in the Bible? What's the event? What's happening?
The name change.
Name change. Who gets it? Jacob. Who changes his name? God. Israel is actually two words. Yisra, El. El is God.
God survives.
Yisra is, it means to conquer, but not the sense of conquering another city or anything. It's the sense of to overcome, to face something that is an incredibly difficult challenge and to beat it, right? So this word can be translated as prevails or strives. God prevails or God strives. Now I want you to think about that name for a second. Genesis 13:14. God actually makes three promises to Abraham. Two of the promises are the same one. Through you all nations will be blessed. But Genesis 13 is a different promise. This is when him and Lot are separated. The Lord said to Abraham after Lot had separated from him, now raise your eyes and look from this place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see I will give to you and to your descendants forever. That word forever in Hebrew, it's ad olam. Ad means up to, and olam means eternity. Did God say, I will give this land to you until the Messiah comes?
No.
Did God say, I will give this land to you until I've completed my promise?
No.
No. He said up to eternity. That's significant. God prevails up to eternity. So I want you to think about this for a second. The Egyptians conquered the Israelites from 1400 to 1100 BC. Then the Philistines dominated them. This is when we're talking about Samson and stuff. Then the Assyrians would come in 700s. The Babylonians would come in the 500s. They would destroy them. They'd take them off slavery. The Persians would conquer them in the 500s to the 300s. Then the Greeks would conquer them from the 300s to the 160s. Then the Seleucid Empire would come in and conquer them until the Maccabees. That's the last time they had an independent sovereign state. And then Rome would conquer them from 63 BC to 136 AD. 2 temples would be destroyed under the Romans. The nation would go into exile. And in 638 AD, the permanent Islamic rule would come in, which would be the Rashidun Caliphate. 1100 AD, you got the Crusades. 1200 to 1900, you got the Ottoman Empire. 1900 to 1940s, you got the British. 1940s, you get the World War II genocide. Then you get the Jordan Egyptian attacking them, and now today you have the Hamas attacking them. Who's there right now? That very spot that Abraham was standing in, who's there right now? What's the name of it? What's the name of that land?
Jerusalem.
Israel.
Israel.
If I were to look at a map, what name would I see?
Israel.
Israel. 4,000 years. 4,000 years of conflict. Now, do you think this is an accurate term?
So far.
God prevails. 4,000 years of conflict. One guy tried to prove God wrong. You know what his name was? Adolf Hitler. He couldn't succeed. Right? They're still there today. That land, that very spot where Abraham was standing, is still called Israel. 4,000 years later. Truth is, it doesn't matter what man does. Because when God makes a promise, he keeps it. That's what's important to understand. So that name Israel pops up. Let's look at our timeline. You got the conquering ancestors of Abraham, yet there's no land recognized, right? During that time, they called them the Hyksos. Then you get a nomadic people of Yahweh, the Shasu. And then you get the nomadic people invaded Canaan, the Habaru. And then finally, under Minerta, you see a recognized independent nation of Israel. Slavery, 40 years wandering, Canaan conquest, nation of Israel. It coincides exactly with the biblical narrative.
Does the Old Testament call them nomads?
Well,
Or it's just in the tablets?
this is my personal opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. I do not think the Hebrew people knew to call themselves Israel until Moses said, "Your name is Israel." You've got 450 years, almost 500 years from when Joseph enters, when you got Jacob changing his name to Israel to when they've established their nation. And I'm not even sure if they knew what to call themselves, to be honest with you. I think they knew who they came from, but it wasn't until Moses came along and said, "You are Israelites," that they actually told other people, "We're the nation of Israel." That's just my personal opinion, and I think that's why you don't see the name Israel pop up any later than that. Does that make sense? Okay. 925 BC. This is 2 Chronicles. It came to pass that King Rehoboam's 5th year that they had been unfaithful to the Lord, that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem with 1,200 chariots, 60,000 horsemen. And the people who came with him from Egypt were without number, the Lubim, the Sukkim, and the Ethiopians, who captured the fortified cities of Judah and came as far as Jerusalem. We go back to the temple of Karnak, this guy, Shoshennik 1. He had his own room. He wrote his own stories, how great he was. And on his list, he put that he conquered Gibeon, Megiddo, but this is what's important. He said he conquered the fields of Abraham and the highlands of David. See, they're struggling to find archaeological evidence of David. And so a lot of people are like, oh, he didn't really exist. It's hard to say he didn't exist when you go to another country and you find his name on their wall, right? I mean, the Egyptian archaeology coincides with the biblical narrative. It's incredible. So one bonus nugget of information. Whoops. This is called the Papyrus Anastasi 1. It's dated to about 1200 BC.
Are these the tablets from these different, are these pharaohs that you're talking about? The Egyptians, where these tablets came from? You know, you've got Amen, Hop. Is that a pharaoh?
Amenhotep?
Yeah, right.
Yes, yes. These are pharaohs.
So all of these are pharaohs.
Yeah.
Is a papyrus.
So this is a papyrus. I know. It's a lot of information. You guys don't be afraid to ask questions. I get it. So yes, these were the reigns of the pharaohs, is what we were looking at, and what the pharaohs wrote is about Israel, about Egypt, or about Yahweh. You know, and what it is it's showing how the biblical narrative is precise using extra biblical information. The Egyptians, who were the superpower at the time, right? So this is the Papyrus Anastasia. The thing about Anastasi, I screw up these names. The thing about these papyruses is they're named by the person. They get the name of the person who translated them. So that's why a lot of these do not seem like Egyptian names. It's by the guy who translated it. But this is dated 1200 BC, and this is what's interesting about it. It says the narrow defile is infested with shasu, nomads. Concealed beneath the bushes, some of them are 4 cubits or 5 cubits from head to foot. Fierce of face, their heart is not mild, and they hearken not to coaxing. This is talking about the Pharaoh going into Canaan and getting beat. This is one of the few times where you actually read about a failure of an Egyptian king. But here's what's interesting. Does anybody know how tall 5 cubits is?
5 feet.
8 feet.
What?
So you have an Egyptian account of people in Canaan that were 8 feet tall. Is there another book somewhere that talks about giants being in the land of Canaan? It's called the Bible.
You're right.
Do you know what word they use?
Giants.
Well, yes and no. You'll see this word pop up a lot in the Bible, depending on what translation you use. It's a very old word. Rephaim. That word is a Hebrew word which translates to giant. It's used a lot in the Bible. If you get a concordance, you look it up, you'll see it gets used a lot. But Rephaim is an old word. It's a word that's been around for a long time. It's written in several different other people's cultures. What that word means is questionable, but the Bible is the only one that refers to Rephaim as the giants of the land. Gath, Goliath's brother, the king of Og. From what we can understand, they were very, very tall people. You know, even I questioned the height of Goliath. I was like, I don't know about a guy who's 9 feet tall, you know. But after looking at Egyptian history and seeing what they wrote, I believe it. Because now you got 2 witnesses who are saying this. In a court of law, if you have 2 witnesses who have nothing to do with each other who tell the same story, you have to accept this fact. That's American law. So here you've got 2 witnesses.
God's law also.
Yeah.
On 2 witnesses or more.
Yeah, 2 or more witnesses. Yeah. But here you have 2 witnesses who tell the same story who have nothing to do with each other.
What
So
part of the book is that in, or by book is that in, for Goliath and the giants?
Rephaim, it starts with Moses in Exodus,
Oh, Exodus.
and then Isaiah uses it. Joshua uses it. I can't remember how many times it's used, but it's used quite a bit. So
Well, we do know there are tribes and peoples that are tall. I mean, they're like 7 and 8 feet tall.
yeah,
You know, like in Africa.
no, it's still around today, but
Look at the basketball teams that are out
Yeah.
there. You know?
who they were, where they're from, we really don't know, because as far as we know, they're all gone. But
Yeah.
the question of whether or not they existed, I can't say no, you know. Any questions?
There's no tombs or mummies or bone fragments or anything that suggest.
No. I've actually done a lot of studying on it, which would be like a whole nother class.
Yeah.
But
Archaeologists haven't, or scientists haven't found any.
I think they found pretty big shoes. I know they found big shoes, but not bodies. They're still looking. But any other questions? I actually got through that on time. I didn't think I would. It was a lot of information. I know.
Good lesson. You know what? It just proves that God's word is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, you're researching with archaeology, coming up with stuff written by people that weren't Christians.
Here's what I've learned about archaeology. The facts, you know what the difference is between a fact and a theory? A fact is witnessed, a theory is not. That's the difference. So when you witness it, you call it a fact. Theory of evolution. For some reason, they dropped off the theory part, but it's still a theory because no one's ever witnessed it. They've never found the missing link. They can't prove it. When you start doing research, you find out that the facts, there's not a whole lot of facts out there, especially when you go further and further back in time. And when you're doing research, you're bombarded by opinions. Most of what you read is somebody's opinion or interpretation of the facts. It's their theory. And all archaeology makes one assumption. And this one assumption defines how they proceed with their opinions. That one assumption is either the Bible is true or the Bible is false. Based on that one assumption, they will come to two completely different theories or opinions. And so when you do your research, you have to dig through all the opinions and you have to get to the facts. It's like that old guy from Black and White. Just the facts, man. Just the facts, you know. So
Jack Webb.
there you go. Thank you. All right, we're done.
Good lesson.
I would like to have a picture of